Um, and so just to introduce myself real quick, I am Renee Chow. I am chair of the Leadership Columbia Alumni Association. And just in case anybody isn't familiar, we're a group of Leadership Columbia graduates committed to continued professional development and civic service. This year we started this power session series in light of COVID and social distancing, and we just wanted to have a time where there were a quick opportunity to set aside 30 minutes for engagement, improvement, and renewal for today's professionals. So this is an opportunity open to everyone, whether a graduate or not. And today we're going to be talking about meaningful board service and providing value back to the organizations that we serve with, or maybe you're a longtime board member or someone looking to get more involved. And we're joined today by Mary Dell Hayes, who is a graduate of the Leadership Columbia class of 2018. She has more than 15 years of experience working with nonprofit organizations and is the principal consultant for StopGap Solutions, where she provides project management, interim leadership, and development support for nonprofit organizations. And so she's here to talk to us about this relationship between boards and their executive directors, and hopefully give us some insight on how to improve our volunteer service. Thanks, Mary Dell, for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Well, I'm so excited to be with everyone today, and I see lots of new and longer term friends. And it's always exciting for somebody who works from home to get to have human interaction during the day. And so, gosh, this is lovely. And I've got a brief PowerPoint just because I'll tell stories all day long. And so that should keep us on track. But of course, feel free to interrupt at any time and make this conversational. And we'll run through a few scenarios of things that boards might run into, and just kind of have a pretty frank conversation about what executive directors are looking for from their board members that they might be afraid to ask you for. So I have served as an executive director before, and I've surveyed a number of my executive director colleague friends about, like, what do you really want your board members to know? So this is good, bad, and ugly. But I'm going to go ahead and pull up my little slides and get us kind of moving. Here we go. So I am Mary Dell Hayes. I am part of the OKest class ever, leader of Leadership Columbia of 2018. We make no claims for greatness, but a lot of claims for getting it done at average. But I think the first thing that you should know about going into board service is why you're bothering to serve on a board in the first place. And to be frankly honest about that, because everybody doesn't show up to serve on a board out of some driving passion and commitment to doing good in the world. And that's okay. Like, let's go ahead and own that. It might be that your work has said you have to be part of a nonprofit organization to maintain your gainful employment. And if that's why you're going to join a board, let's just be real honest about it. Tell the executive director, like, my work says I have to do this and I want to do a good job. So help me help you. You may be one of those people who hasn't figured out how to say no yet, and you accidentally say yes to everything somebody invites you to do. Let's start working on that too. But there are plenty of people who fall into lots of board service kind of sort of on accident. And in fact, I don't think that most of the board members I've ever worked with, and I'm currently working with, I think, 6 or 7 different nonprofit organizations, and of the probably 40 or 50 of those board members, very few of them intentionally sought out service on that board. Most of them were invited by somebody that they know, or fell into it through a work appointment. So when you sign up to be a board member, you typically take on some responsibilities. And I'm going to excuse myself to throw my cat off the table right now. He's a very aggressive networker, and he's always trying to join boards too. But these commitments that you make have formal language around duty of care and duty of loyalty and duty of obedience. And that's what you'll hear a lot of times, but we're going to take some time to break down what that really means, and then like in street terms, like what that really means. So the real responsibilities of a board revolve around hiring and firing the executive director, approving the budget and financials, giving and raising money, giving and raising money, giving and raising money. Everybody wants you to be giving and raising money. If they say that you don't have to be a fundraiser when you join a board, they're lying to you. Don't listen to that. They don't mean it. It's a trap. And then really setting the future direction of the organization, which again, you can't do unless you're giving and raising money. You're responsible for your peers, and so making sure that your other board members are effective and competent, and then keeping the organization out of trouble. And there's a number of ways that organizations can intentionally and unintentionally fall into times of trouble. And it's one of the things that I think we struggle with in our community is talking about why nonprofits are in existence, why we're keeping them in existence, and what role they play in our overall ecosystem. So you've heard now, like what this organization should be asking of you, what your obligations are, what should they be giving you in return? They should be, every board that you join should have some type of onboarding training where you learn about the organization's function and programs. You should be able to have functional knowledge of how the organization works, and what its purpose is and how that goes about in a day-to-day concept. They should be providing you with regularly scheduled meeting times. So you should not be getting any like, hey, we realized we need to have a board meeting. Who's available tomorrow? You should get a schedule of meetings, and a schedule of committee meetings so that you can plan ahead, and actively participate. I'm currently working with an organization where the board had never approved a budget, and had not seen financial statements in more than a year. And so that's not a good thing. You should be seeing financial statements at least quarterly and be part of a process to approve an annual budget. And part of that means not just rubber stamping that budget, but asking questions about what does this mean for our future? Some of that may mean being really honest and saying, I don't know what a balance statement is. Like, I don't know what cash flow is. And asking to get a better understanding of what the story is behind all of these numbers and what they mean. You should have meaningful opportunities to be part of the vision setting and the strategic future of the organization. So ideally through a strategic planning process, you should be looking 6, 18, and 3 years out at really at best to determine where the organization is going and why it continues to stay in existence. And the nonprofit should be prompting you rather regularly to both make a donation and to fundraise for the organization. And so I am a fundraiser by trade. Fundraising is my heart. And so I can't let it go. I'm sorry. I'm like a dog with a bone when it comes to it. And I think it's critical and necessary for the health of our organizations for us to continue to center a lot of board leadership around that fundraising obligation. Oops, got ahead. So good board members. Good board members probably make up about half of your board. They have like great attendance records. They make their annual gift. They share about the organization in their social circle, and they kind of keep up with what's going on. Good board members are so reliable and consistent and important. And again, they're about half of your board members, and that's good. You need, like, we all know the 80-20s, it's fine. Your excellent board members, if you want to be an excellent board member, and I think you all want to be an excellent board member, you need to call and check on your executive director. Let me tell you, that person is really struggling. They are tired, they are overworked, they don't want to admit any vulnerabilities because they're scared you might fire them. But that person needs some safe space with their leadership team to work through organizational issues. And so the stronger the relationship of the board is with the executive director, the more frank and honest that relationship can be which creates more growth opportunities for the organization. So again, that requires a pretty significant investment of time in that relationship. Excellent board members make a meaningful personal donation. I always say a meaningful personal donation because I don't believe in having a floor or a ceiling necessarily for board gifts. Obviously, organizations all have a different approach to that, but if you're going to look at having an inclusive board that's representative of our community at large, you're going to have people with different capacity and different definitions of meaningful. And so there are people who making a $1,000 gift is a really, really big commitment. And there are people for whom making a $10,000 gift is no skin off their back. So I encourage you to think about that language of a meaningful personal contribution. And then that they believe so much in the organization's work that they're willing to engage their own social circle to be making meaningful personal donations. And so a lot of times we'll look at statistics around what is the average board member gift, and then what is the average board member raising. And you want to look at getting those numbers to constantly increase as people believe more and more in the organization. An excellent board member is going to encourage that culture of philanthropy by talking to other board members about their giving and fundraising and their commitment to the organization. Now, on every board, there's going to be at least a handful of people who say, I'm not going to raise money. I hate fundraising. It's so yucky. But they can all be part of it in some capacity. And so there's a board that I work with where one of the board members absolutely says she is just the terriblest fundraiser in the world. She's not. She just doesn't like it. But she's also the best thank you person in the world. And she's willing to spend all day on the phone making thank you calls once a month. And that is a huge gift to stewardship and cultivation. So again, there's plenty of ways for people to be part of the process without them having to directly necessarily ask for money. An excellent board member is going to keep other board members out of the weeds. So if they recognize that a board member is starting to get into the operations of the organization, that they're trying to get into the day-to-day management, they're going to help pull those board members out of the weeds to stay focused on that strategic level, because that's where boards are called to operate, unless the executive director is specifically requesting guidance and insight and wisdom into how to handle a specific operational situation. My favorite board member that I ever got to work with was our challenge groupthink person. And he was always the guy who was like, but why? But why are we going to do this? What's the point? Does anybody care? And so that person who's willing to challenge the status quo and encourage the group to have the conversation when we initially all agree brings such value to the organization. And a lot of times that person needs encouragement because they feel like they're being difficult. They feel like they're constantly bucking against the status quo. And so if you recognize that somebody is filling that role, encouraging them to continue to take that process, because we've got to think differently and we've got to have those challenging discussions at the strategic level. If we all rubber stamp something, we'll end up just working at the State House, and all of us are looking for more meaningful service than that. Yeah. So excellent board members also continue to support the organization at the conclusion of their term. So they stay involved in some capacity. You know, they accept that their board service is over and they let the board and the organization move on, but they continue to provide that increased level of support and engagement and cheerleading for the organization. And then the excellent board members are always happy to help in the strategic vision setting and forcing the board to operate from that plane. So I think it's really easy for people to gravitate towards what they know and what their area of expertise is, which is often more in the day-to-day operations of a business. But when you force that to go to the strategic level, and when you help other people to stay at that strategic level, you're really helping to advance change in our communities. So now let's talk about bad board members, because they are abundant in the Columbia area. And we love you, bad board members. Like, I think you all have great intentions for the most part. But you get in over your heads because you're overcommitted. So part of your commitment to a board is a duty of loyalty. And I've been married for almost 15 years, and I've only figured out how to be loyal to that one person. And so I think when you have a duty of loyalty, I don't know how you can be loyal to multiple nonprofit organizations. You're going to face some kind of conflict of interest inherently. Now, you may be able to be on the board of like a professional association and a human service organization or your church. But also, like, you just only have so many hours in the day. So bad board members are historically overcommitted, and they care a lot and they want to do a lot of good, but they're just stretched too thin. Bad board members get in the operating weeds of the organization. So they want to talk about the day-to-day management issues. They want to talk about day-to-day program operations when that's not going to drive the future of the organization. There was recently a nonprofit in town that went through a little bit of a social media crisis, and a board member from that organization discussed that situation with her colleague, asking for professional advice. Totally reasonable. I can see how any of us would do that. But then that colleague repeated it to another colleague, and it, you know how the game telephone works. So if your organization is in a situation that is going to require confidential guidance, hire somebody. Don't rely on just your own circle to try to solve that and keep things and expect that things will remain confidential. Bad board members engage board members outside of official decision-making settings. So they have the meeting after the meeting in the parking lot. They call somebody to stir something up. Just don't do that. Like, and again, I think it truly comes from the place of best intent. Like, it's when you have time to deal with it, but it creates an uncomfortable situation for the board as a whole. We're going to continue talking about that bad board members make assumptions. So they're not willing to ask the why. They want to go along with the group think. They want to rubber stamp decisions. They're inconsistent or non-existent, or they over participate in ways that are not helpful. And then they just conveniently always forget to donate, or they won't commit to making a gift. Again, all of these come from places of good intent, I truly believe, but if you find yourself identifying with this, go ahead and quit the board that you're on. Do everybody a favor and just say, it's not working right now. Please give me some time and I'll come back around. And that's okay. Like, we don't have to all be on a board. There's so many ways to give and serve and to lift up the nonprofits in our community without board service. I think we over glamorize board service when it's a very serious long-term commitment and a lot of work in most cases. And so I think it's okay to be just a volunteer with an organization, to give your time pro bono, to serve in your professional capacity, or donate your skills pro bono to the organization without being on the board. That's all amazing, meaningful work that matters, that is just as important as being on a board. So I think one of the things that we have to talk about is what happens when nonprofits are in a ditch, and that happens way more often than you think, because we all do PR better than we think. But if you find yourself in a situation where the nonprofit that you work with is going through some problems, and you're on the board, it's your job to get them out of the ditch. So prepare to spend some money and to work from that strategic level at banking a plan and getting help. But I would also encourage you to have a conversation about why the organization needs to continue to exist. We have a tremendous number of nonprofits, and if we had more frank and honest conversations about, is this organization the most effective that it could be in its current capacity? Is it creating change in our community? Would it be better served to merge with another organization to create efficiencies? If we evaluated our nonprofits for their need to exist in the same way that we evaluate our businesses, I think we could quickly wean and lean out our sector to become more effective and more impactful. And I think sometimes we're scared to have those hard conversations because it hurts people's feelings, and it gets into people's emotional attachment to organizations. There have been a number of scenarios of organizations in town where this is not just happening in little small nonprofits with budgets of less than $500,000. You have multi-million dollar organizations where the executive has opened the organization up to liabilities through human resources practices, where the organization is in serious financial trouble, where perhaps their model of service delivery is outdated or ineffective. And the board will make every possible effort to cover it up and give that person a retirement party and send them on their way, and bring a new person in to clean up the mess. And without ever taking that pause to say, why are we here and what are we called to do? So if you are on the board, I think it's just as important to be the brakes as it is to be the gas. And to make sure that somebody is appreciative of that role of being the brakes and says, hold up, why are we doing this? And if the organization that you're working with is awesome, that's so great. Congratulations, you'll be in the ditch soon. Because it's inevitable. There's going to be a leadership transition. There's going to be something that happens that throws you off your game. And so you've got to be prepared for it. Do you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy? Is your board regularly working through emergency scenarios? So one of the organizations that I was executive director for, we carved out 15 minutes in every board meeting. And in every board meeting, we would take that 15 minutes to work through something that was a possible scenario. So what would we do if the office manager stole money? Would we go public? Would we have the person arrested? What would that process look like? So we would talk through it and document our discussion. We talked through what would we do if one of our major donors got into a significant legal scandal? Would we give the money back? Would we continue to accept money from that person moving forward? If that person's name was affiliated with our organization, would we have to make a public statement? Thinking through what's going to happen if a key staff member dies. It's a tragedy, but the organization has to keep functioning. And so creating that space for us to talk through those times helped us to be prepared when those times actually happened. And I think we're all acutely aware of that coming out of the past year, how quickly things can change and how you have to manage and operate your organization. And again, continuing to question the organization's need to exist and its pipeline of leadership moving forward. So if all of this was really boring, the top 10 hit list is don't serve on more than one board at once. You can volunteer all the places you want to, but like at best, don't serve on more than 2 boards. Please make sure that you're giving a personally meaningful gift. And take the time to explain to the executive or development staff member why your gift matters so that they understand why you're giving, because they need to hear that. It helps them do their job better. Commit to sharing about the organization in your social circle at least once per week, and tell the executive director and the other board members that you're doing that. Ask why all the time. Do something nice for your executive director because that person is suffering in a meaningful way. Encourage living wages and generous benefits in the nonprofit sector because we perpetuate the problems that we claim to be solving in many, many cases by keeping people living in the same circumstances that we are attempting to address. Make sure that things are legal so that you're filing your 990s, that you're getting your audits done in a timely fashion, that you're keeping your registration up with the Secretary of State's office, that you're in compliance with your organizational bylaws, that your bylaws are up to date. Have plenty of ample disagreements and keep them cordial. Keep an eye on the financials, make sure nobody's stealing and you're not running out of money. And if you can't do it, just quit already. And I think that's the biggest one, is giving people permission to quit and know that that's okay. You don't have to be on a board. You can still be a successful community member and a brilliant leader and not be a terrible board member at the same time. So there's plenty of space for all of that. That was the quick version. Glancing at the chat, a little bit about putting yourself out there. I think if you don't immediately have a pet organization that you want to jump in with, someone will find you. That's the scary part. But pick something that is interesting to you that you would like to know more about. But there are also plenty of excellent board members who provide very meaningful service for causes that they don't care that much about. And it's kind of nice to have their impartial advice and wisdom because they're not so emotionally invested in the cause or in driving the situation forward. And so that's definitely a benefit as well. But I'm happy to answer any other questions about board service or to tell scary stories about times that boards have covered up malfeasance or otherwise enabled bad nonprofits. Excellent. We're going to go the scary story route. This will be really fun. So let's pretend that this is the board of directors and we are the board of directors and we're meeting. And I'm here to tell you that let's see, what have I done terrible today? We have our biggest funder is a federal grant. And because of the political whatever that's happening right now, that money's going to go away June 30th. And we have to decide, are we going to raise the money from the private sector to carry on with the grant? Or are we going to let the people go and close the program? What are we going to do? And then how are we going to tell the public about it? I don't know. So first we have to decide, does the program matter? Is it relevant and important still, even if we're not getting this stream of money that we expected? And then if we decide that the program doesn't matter, then we've got some people to terminate. Are we going to terminate them immediately, or are we going to let them work till the end of the program? And then how are we going to communicate that to the public? Are we going to make a public announcement that we're closing this program, or are we going to let it quietly die off into the sunset? Or are we going to go whole hog and make a big public announcement and say the federal government has cut off our funding and we decided that this is so important and it's so critical to the infrastructure of our community that we are asking you, the private individual, to pay for what it's going to take to keep this forward, and we've got 30 days to raise $500,000. It's a real thing that happens to a lot of organizations, and if you're not prepared in talking about it, it can catch you really off guard and acting from a reactive place instead of a strategic place. And our hope for all of our boards is that they're continuing to act from a strategic engagement instead of reacting to whatever emergency is at hand. And the emergencies are always just around the corner. And if you're on a board and you're not regularly dealing with emergencies, then your executive director is probably not being very honest with you because they're happening. And so it's part of your job to say, like, well, what are you scared to tell us? What's keeping you up at night? And to probe to create that engagement. So it is 2:30, so we can wrap up. But again, please don't feel obligated to serve on the board just because it sounds good. It's way more harder and a lot more work than it seems. But if you are prepared to serve on a board and you need help finding one, I would be happy to help you find that organization to connect with and to support you in that process. And so it's so nice of everybody to take time on this beautiful day to be here. And again, thank you for taking me out of the isolation of self-employment and working at home to connect with others, primarily women, except for Bryant, and Michael. But it's great to see this group of wonderful people. Thank you for being here again. And then Renee, do you need to do a PSA at the end?
No, I just wanted to, we had kind of given Mary Della a heads up that if any of y'all need to go right now, then happy to have you wrap up. But if there were a couple questions and everything, we have about 5 minutes that we can take on some questions. And I know that we had a couple get added in the chat and everything. And Kim had asked, basically, how if you're trying to kind of, if you want to be involved on a board or, want to be considered for a board, how can you kind of network or put yourself out there or kind of make the case for getting involved?
Most organizations have a new fiscal year that starts July 1st. And as part of that, they've got board members rolling off and they need new board members rolling on. So it's hot recruitment season. If you want to get recruited, now is the time. Everybody's hiring.
And then in terms of, being the expectation for donations to be a part of your role as a board member, can that also be something else besides a monetary donation?
I think that is a conversation between the board member and the director, because if the organization needs the service or the resource, it can be way more meaningful than a cash contribution. But if the organization doesn't identify that as a strategic need, they may feel more burdened than gifted by it. So I think that's part of the honest conversations that we have to have, but also that's why defining what's meaningful and personal as a contribution is between you and the organization in the first place, because it's different for everybody. And we need to celebrate the people who are making $50 and $100 and $500 contributions when that's a significant portion of their income, instead of continuing to laud the people who make $10,000 contributions who could be doing 10-fold times that without blinking. I sound like a crazy person, but that's okay. No. Equitable fundraising, guys. It's so fun.
That's great. Do we have anybody who wants to just go ahead and voice one last question?
If you don't mind, yeah, I would love to have a little bit of a follow-up question to both of those. So I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, and you kind of started to get there, but I haven't served on a board before. And so say if there were kind of a small board in Columbia, so we're not talking about, I don't know, I feel like the Animal Mission or Homeless No More, or something that's really kind of larger. Like, what would, on a smaller board, a typical monetary donation expectation be? Because I literally don't know if it's $150 or $1,500 or $5,000. And then my second question is, I feel like Together SC or someone keeps a running tab of open board positions. So I was trying to search, but I couldn't find it. So if you know of a resource like that as well, that would be appreciated, even though I know you kind of offered to match people up as well.
Yes, I'm happy to be a matchmaker. I think what the organization expects depends on the culture of the organization. So if the organization has an intensive fundraising culture, they're going to expect more in the giving and the getting. And if they're smaller and on the front end of that, they're going to have less of that expectation. So it's kind of all over the map. So you might have an organization with a $500,000 budget who has a very small but highly engaged network of people making large gifts. So you just kind of have to ask around. You can look at the 990s on GuideStar, and you can see who the board members are and kind of what it looks like the average giving is. But it's way easier to just call and ask. And then that's a great point about Together SC. So Together SC is our statewide nonprofit association. Full disclosure, they are a client of mine. And we are working on membership benefits. And one of the things that we hope to highlight in the coming fiscal year are more opportunities for board service. And so I think that also I would give a shout out to the Junior League, because they maintain a lot of information about board service opportunities if you're a member of the Junior League. But really, I have never heard of someone calling an organization and saying, hey, I think what you do is really interesting, and I would like to learn more about getting involved, including potential board service, and then being like, oh no, we don't need that. Everybody needs it. They're all looking for new board members, and anytime you can get a board member who's not from your obvious already existing circle is an opportunity to diversify the thought patterns within your organization, and that's always welcome. It's nice when we don't have such incestuous circles.
That's a select number of people in town sometimes doing similar things. So well, Mary Dell, thank you so much for joining us today and going over all of this. We'd love to be able to share your PowerPoint with everyone who is in attendance and everything as a follow-up. And we just thank everybody for your time today. We'll have some more LCAA event announcements to wind down this membership year and everything. And also just want to remind everybody that the Leadership Columbia current class is wrapping up their project, and we'll be graduating soon. So there will be things to celebrate with that as well. And just keep an eye out for news about what they've been up to this year. So with that, we wish you all a happy rest of your Wednesday afternoon, and we'll talk soon. Thank you guys so much.
Have a great afternoon.